Well, hi, and welcome to the Empower Nutrition Podcast. Erin Skinner here, your host, and I'm so excited to welcome Kari Natwick to the show. Hi, Kari, welcome.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So, Kari, everyone, she's a fellow dietitian, and she's been quite connected with our SIBO Academy. So we know each other through that,
Yep.
through just working together to learn how to optimize our clients' gut health. And Kari, you're the gut brain dietitian. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the gut brain axis. I'm so excited for that.
Yes, I'm super excited too. There's a lot to talk about, but we'll see what we get to here in the next few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's just get into it.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, I think a lot of people kind of realize the importance of the microbiome and digestive health, and so they focus on the microbiome, but the gut
Mhm.
brain axis specifically, tell me how you came to focus on that.
Well, I came to focus on it out of necessity. I mean, and most of it comes from the client population that I have, the majority of my patients. So I work primarily in digestive health, and just about, and I'm sure you can relate to this, 99% of people who have digestive disorders have some kind of disorder of the gut brain axis, and it's all interconnected, right? And so, and that can be, everything from, like things like, just speaking of the SIBO Academy, the connection between SIBO and the brain and the vagus nerve. Think about the impact of stress on digestion, on absorption, on motility, on the microbiome. And so it just seemed like we really cannot serve this patient population in the world of digestive health without talking about this intricate, connection between our gut and our brain and how the two are influencing each other constantly, like every second of every day. They're communicating to one another and influencing the health of the other organ, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's been interesting. I guess not interesting, but sad to see. I feel like there's been like a huge increase in anxiety, like during COVID and like still post COVID. I've
It's
seen quite a lot
huge.
more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely huge. And I think anxiety is one of the, I don't know, again, like one of the most pertinent topics to the patient population that I work with, and again, I'm sure that you work with. And I think it just definitely deserves a lot more airtime, just in terms of how we can support people. Again, how helping people resolve gut issues can improve anxiety, but also thinking about anxiety like more globally in the space of like, it is just not something that is separate from us. Anxiety is not something that is just wrong with us. Like, if you have anxiety, doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or that it's something to overcome. I really think anxiety needs to be looked at through an entirely different lens.
Totally. I think a lot of times people act like they've kind of been given the impression that it's some type of a character trait, but actually,
Yeah.
it sounds like there's a lot physiologically that can drive and modulate it. So maybe tell me about your thoughts on like what are some of the main root causes?
Well, I mean, so first, I mean, I think to back up just a little bit, like in the way that I think about anxiety, I really think of anxiety as a communicator,
Mm,
right? I mean, it's something that is communicating that within our bodies, possibly even like more globally, like this whole mind body connection, that
mhm.
it's not just something in our bodies, like it can be the gut brain connection, but it can also be a communication that something else is awry in our life, right? Like anxiety can be an indication of disconnection, spiritually. It can be a disconnection socially. And because of that, I think like when we think of anxiety as more of an alarm system, as a communication slash alarm system, then we can start thinking about like being present with the experience of anxiety as something that we just actually need to slow down, stop, pay attention to, and really try to like unravel what is happening in terms of like the root causes. And of course, there's like, this can be like, there can be so many different things. And when I think of like the root causes of anxiety, one of the terms that I like to talk about with my patients is this concept of allostatic load, right? And like allostatic load can refer to all of these different stressors that are occurring in our life simultaneously, and they can be both internal and external. Another way to think about this this is, and what a lot of people like the word that they'll use to encapsulate this is the exposome. And I think it's just this brilliant word that, it sounds exactly like what it is. It's like everything in the world that we're being exposed to. And when we think about that, and we think about how that translates into what our body and our communication system is telling us through anxiety, that is just a completely different mindset already, right? Where anxiety becomes something where we can say, okay, like we actually need to stop and, think about this totally differently. Because, in like this, in the exposome, like just to give a few examples of things that it can, refer to, it can just be like life in general. And I think like me as a mom, I think of like life as like the overwhelming, component of life, of just all the things that we're managing and juggling. And, the thing that I've struggled with the most with anxiety is this idea of more of like time scarcity. Like I just don't have enough time to get things done. And, when I start to slow things down and, adopt a different mindset, it helps me to both like recognize, A, it's not true. B, how do I prioritize my life differently? How do I construct my schedule in a way where I'm not like overscheduling myself and thinking about like, trying to do more all of the time.
Yeah.
That's like one example of things where we can like think differently about anxiety and slow things down.
Yeah.
But other, exposome factors can be everything from like genetic predisposition. So if you have single nucleotide polymorphisms like MTHFR, COMT, like MAOA, like all of those genetic SNPs can also influence anxiety, nutrition and nutrient deficiencies, HPA axis disruption, of course, trauma, right? I mean, there's just like the list could just go on and on and on when it comes to the exposome and all of the things that can be impacting us. So that's, I mean, again, like I like to like kind of pull back and think about this. And then the gut-brain connection, of course, is a huge part of, what modulates anxiety in our body as well.
I'm so excited to get into that. I already have 1,000 thoughts, but just before I do, I kind of wonder if anybody might be thinking like, well, why get into all this? Because I just pop a Xanax and like everything's good. Like, why don't we just depend on prescription medications or pharmaceutical solutions for anxiety? Or like, tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I think, one of the main reasons from my perspective is that it like popping a Xanax, it's just a temporary solution, right? Like it's not going to actually change anxiety in your body or in your life. And when we think about things like, antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, statistically, they only work about 50% of the time. So, and this can be for a variety of reasons. Again, genetics can create that, your body's inability to use the medication. Sometimes it doesn't have the impact on neurotransmitter production and modulation. And again, it's not really dealing with the root cause of anxiety. And a lot of times, like what's underlying that for people, a big thing that often gets missed is just inflammation, right? So popping a Xanax isn't going to remove inflammation from your body. Popping a Xanax isn't going to change your gut-brain axis, right? And then, I think the other thing to consider is that, a lot of drugs have side effects. And for a lot of people, I think these medications can also alter their own self-concept, right? There's a lot of stigma around them. There's a lot of, even like the self-concept that like, this is something that I'm dependent on. It's almost like it can feel really disempowering, for people. So, so I think that, and of course, the other thing is like things like, a lot of times the medications that are used, like benzos that are most commonly used, they're addictive and they have short and long-term side effects, right?
Yeah. And it sounds like you're not saying like, oh, you should you're going to judge people that use medication. It's more just that like in my practice, I really enjoy giving people like options because sometimes they would rather get to the root cause
Right.
that's what they want, but they just
Right.
haven't been given that opportunity. All they're
Right.
given is a prescription pad. Yeah.
Right, exactly, and that's a really great point, and I'm so glad you brought that up. This is not to,
Yeah.
like, create any type of, I don't know, just feelings for people that if they are using a medication to help manage anxiety, that there's anything wrong with that, because absolutely there isn't, and if it helps you, great. And like you can do that coupled with a lot of these other lifestyle interventions that
Yeah.
we're going to be talking about today. And oftentimes the combination of those two things really supports people in managing their anxiety and their health, and their life in the best way possible.
Totally. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
let's get to some of these root causes. So, I mean, you're the gut brain RD, so maybe we can start there. I mean, I think the classic thing is kind of like someone has IBS, they go to the doctor tells them it's all in their head and that
Yeah.
that it's just a mood problem or a mental health
It's all
problem.
in their head,
Yes.
right?
And then I think there's this more like modern kind of like thing of like, oh, it has, how dare you dismiss me in that way. There's a true problem with my gut, which is true. But I think what I've come around to realize with in like learning more about the gut brain axis is that there is a gut brain communication happening here, but it's not that like a mood problem is causing the digestive symptoms as much as it could be that the gut imbalances are causing mood imbalances. So it's almost
Abs
like the
Yeah,
connection that they were alluding to is true, but they had the direction
right.
incorrect. But what do you think about that?
Well, the way I think of it is our gut is our brain, is our gut is our brain. Like they're really they're one and the same. And again, there's
Yeah.
like it really does pose the question of like what came first, the chicken or the egg? We
Yeah.
will never know, right? Because
Right.
they are like, in constant communication with one another, and we, like, it's happening all of the time, and they both are, highly influential on one another, right?
Right.
So, I think of like the gut microbiota, um, really has demonstrated unique functions that change behavior. That changes our mood. It changes the connection, and like the way that it does that in the gut is that the gut will actually is instrumental in converting neurochemicals into neurotransmitters, right? And these neurotransmitters are the chemical messengers that enable neurotransmission. So once they're synthesized in the gut, and specifically, from amino acids, they travel up through our vagus nerve and through the enteric nervous system, where they go to the brain and they start to influence the brain. So I think, one of the things to, really be thinking about is that, when people have anxiety, is oftentimes, like you said, people think that it starts in the brain, but it usually those things start in the gut because of neurotransmission and neurochemicals that are produced primarily in the gut. And one of those, examples of those is serotonin. So serotonin has a huge influence on our mood, but it also modulates our immune system. It impacts things like inflammation. And that is, primarily, like some of the statistics say, is that, 80% of serotonin is actually produced in the digestive tract, but not in the brain, but primarily used by the brain, right? But also modulates, like, our immune system in our gut.
Mhm.
And then, things like dopamine is another example. That's, it's a catecholamine found primarily in our central nervous system, in the autonomic nervous system. And, that can, that there's so much, I think, to be said about dopamine, especially with the amount of exposure that we now get to things like screens, the amount of things that we do that are just inherent now in today's society, that actually, like, surge and deplete dopamine in our brain. and how that can actually really impact, what's happening in the gut, including things like mucus production in the gut. It also, like dopamine in through that mucosal production can also be protective if, against even things like ulcers, let's just say. It also helps to regulate electrolyte absorption in the gut, right? So you kind of start to, there's like numerous examples of this, but you start to see this, like how neurotransmitter production in the gut and the brain, these signaling back and forth, like it really does have this huge impact, not only on the gut and the brain, but on our body and our systems in general. Right?
Yeah, totally. And tell me a little bit more about like intestinal permeability. It sounds like you're saying that like one of the things that's happening is there's this imbalance of the ecosystem and the bacteria of the gut that causes a difference in terms of like the neurotransmitter production. But then there's also some challenges with like the mucosal lining and maybe some what people call leaky gut, but intestinal permeability. And maybe tell me more about how like you see that playing with like anxiety specifically.
Well, and I think, so leaky gut or intestinal permeability. So again, the impact of that. So when you have any like level of dysbiosis in the gut, so imbalances of good bacteria, or you have bad bacterial overgrowth in the gut, one of the things that creates is a lot of those bacteria can, create or have lipopolysaccharides, which then, if they leak through the gut, become into direct contact with our circulatory system. And they're very inflammatory, not only to the gut, they're very damaging to the gut lining, but they promote a lot of inflammation systemically in your body because it basically, it recruits your immune system to attack these foreign substrates that are circulating through our body. So with that inflammation just generally in the body can promote more inflammation in the brain, more inflammation in the gut. And again, it just like continues to like feed this cycle of dysregulation between the gut brain axis, but also inflammation in the body. All of this can also be a contributor to anxiety.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I don't think it's any coincidence that like dysbiosis has really increased over the recent few human generations, and anxiety has
For
as
sure.
well. It's like they're parallel epidemics.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I think the other thing that we haven't like stated explicitly is that when you have dysbiosis, a lot of those bad bacteria, so to speak, also totally change what's being signaled, to the brain, not only in terms of like neurotransmitter production, but they can also signal to the brain, even to, start shifting hormones like
Mhm.
cortisol, where it can actually start signaling to our brain to kind of stay stuck in that like that sympathetic nervous system where cortisol continually is being produced because your body is like kind of stuck in fight or flight all the time. And then when
Yeah.
that happens, like cortisol gets dumped into the gut, creates more inflammation in the gut, promotes more dysbiosis. So it's like there's so many systems that can be happening simultaneously again, and constantly kind of like supporting and perpetuating the cycle of
Yeah.
this, the gut brain axis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. So, and like tying in with that, I think too, when you start to have this dysbiosis, you can start to have some challenges with digestion and absorption. And then sometimes I'll see this sort of
Yeah,
vicious cycle happening where then that will in turn kick off challenges with nutritional status because either you're
absolutely.
not absorbing nutrients or you because of your dysbiosis there's foods that you no longer tolerate, like maybe you have to go on a low FODMAP diet or
Yeah,
gluten-free dairy-free diet or an autoimmune diet. Now you've taken a bunch of foods out of your diet, and so you're undernourished for that reason. And then
yeah.
tell me about like how what you see in terms of like nutritional status and anxiety, and like do you see a connection there?
Absolutely. Because and this is the way I think about this. And I love like what you just said, because what it ties into for me, and the thing that I always reiterate to my patients, is that adequate intake really is like a safety signaling to your body. right? And so, and when your body isn't, when you're either, feeling like on a restrictive diet, or you have a lot of, gut related symptoms, and you just don't have an appetite, or I think like this starts to like also kind of cycle into anxiety, where people really start to feel afraid of food because they're
Yeah.
not sure what's causing their GI related symptoms. And
Vicious
so
cycle.
so they just try to avoid everything, and all of this further perpetuates nutritional inadequacy in the diet. It perpetuates blood sugar dysregulation, which actually has a tremendous impact, just on anxiety in general. And when your body, doesn't feel like it's getting enough to eat, again, this like, this, if there's not adequate intake, your body just doesn't feel safe. That can also perpetuate this, this production of stress hormones. So things like cortisol, epinephrine, as your body has to, undergo gluconeogenesis, you start getting like more of this like stress feedback in your body, which all perpetuates anxiety, right?
Yeah. I definitely see that a lot. And especially with digestive problems, you'll tend to start limiting fiber. And then the go to food is more maybe a high glycemic food, like
Yeah.
a gluten free bread or gluten free
Yep.
pretzel or gluten free
y-
pancake or
Yep.
rice. And
Yeah.
um, you would think that the high blood sugar would signal safety, but then because of that blood sugar spike, there's insulin that releases. The insulin drives the blood sugar way down, and now you have this sort of rescue cortisol that comes out, and
Yep.
that's actually anxiety promoting in some cases, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then, like you said, people being on high carbohydrate in diets also for a lot of patients promotes inadequacy of protein intake.
Yeah,
And again, when you think of like not eating enough protein, amino acids are the building blocks for everything, including neurotransmitters, right?
yeah.
So, for example, like tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin. So,
Mhm.
again, when you have those, this inadequate intake of protein, that can further drive the cycle. So, it's like people really need support, I think, and oftentimes professional support from people like you and I to really be guided out of this.
Yeah, because it is a vicious cycle, and it just feels
Yeah.
like spiraling out of control, and you don't exactly
Yeah.
know why.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And then I think too, like in conjunction with that, there's a lot of other nutrient inadequacies that can occur. So, not just, the blood sugar imbalances, the lack of protein intake, but there's a lot of research too that, that shows again, because of GI related dysfunction, lack of intake, people have really low intakes of things like essential fatty acids. And
oh, yeah,
again, when you have low fatty acid intake, that this comprises this, the structural constituents of every single membrane in our body, but particularly the cells within our brain. And our
yeah,
brain is primarily, 33% of our brain is comprised of, of things that belong to omega-3, to the omega-3 family. And when you don't have enough omega-3s in your brain, that can have an impact on your mood. It can decrease
mhm,
BDNF, production. And BDNF is something that we need in order to create new neural pathways in our brain. And again,
mhm,
if you want to get out of anxiety, you have to be able to start thinking about things differently and changing
yeah,
your relationship with the way that you think about food, the way that you're thinking about supporting yourself, the way that you think about, even anxiety. Like that all requires a new way of thinking. And
yeah,
then, I think too, omega-3s are also integral for the production of GABA. And if you don't have enough
yeah,
GABA, a lot of times that's where you start to see circadian rhythm disruptions. And GABA is that neurotransmitter that's like, I always call it the brain balm. It's just like very calming to our brain. It helps us to sleep. It helps promote that deep restorative sleep. So if your brain isn't producing enough GABA and you have circadian rhythm disruption and you're not engaging that, the cleansing of our brain while we're sleeping at night. Again, all of this can start to, that can also feed into the cycle of anxiety. So, so this is where, like, things like omega-3 fatty acids, I think it's a hard sell for anybody to eat enough fatty fish per week, right? The recommendation to eat at least 8 ounces of fatty fish per week is hard for anybody. So I think people can get really quick wins just through supplementation of essential
100%.
fatty acids. Yeah. And it can have, be one of those foundational building blocks to, again, shifting what's happening in the brain and, therefore, again, changing that whole gut brain axis. So that's like one example, right? There's lots of other nutrients, other things like, things like iron, B vitamin deficiencies.
Magnesium is a common deficiency.
Yeah, magnesium is another one. And, again, depending on what's happening with certain genetic SNPs like MTHFR, if you start taking non-methylated B vitamins, I actually see this happen a fair amount. Sometimes that can exacerbate anxiety. So making like quick little, shifts even in supplement protocols can, give people really quick wins and, really reduce anxiety and support gut brain function. So, so there's a lot of things that, we can do just even and be aware of nutritionally that can have a huge impact.
Totally. I mean, maybe let's get into that. So let's say I come to your practice and I really have just had this huge uptick in anxiety and it's affecting my quality of life.
Yeah.
Maybe walk me through, because there's just so much to this. Like, what would be the process? Like, where would we even begin with that? Yeah.
It's a good question. So I have a process that I use with my patients. It's called the Total Gut Reset. And the first thing that we always start with is testing and assessment. So, so testing, because again, we really need to identify if there's any level of infection or dysbiosis in the gut. So we'll start with stool testing, and depending on what somebody's symptoms are, SIBO testing, may be incorporated along with that. Another test that I will often run with my patients is called an hair tissue mineral analysis, or HTMA, to identify underlying mineral deficiencies. Because, like you mentioned, magnesium, there's a lot of minerals that become, primarily depleted when people are under stress and anxiety, starting with sodium and potassium, then moving quickly to magnesium and calcium. And then, that interplays. There's this very strong interconnection between all of the other minerals, right? They all work synergistically together. So we'll do that type of an assessment. And then sometimes I'll also, depending on the patient, we'll do like a quick snapshot of what's happening with their diurnal pattern and cortisol levels. So, and then, with that, we look at just what somebody's symptoms may be. And so we kind of do this information gathering as the first component. Second to that, of course, there's a big, component that revolves around nutrition. So, supporting somebody and finding the right way of eating that supports their relationship with food and their body, right? Yeah. So we always want somebody to constantly be in communicating safety and security with their body when it comes to their relationship with food. But coupled with that, if there are foods, and likely like with most people who have GI related disorders, there are foods that are triggering symptoms for them as well. So removing foods that, act as triggers, and then, the third component, I think the third pillar nutritionally, is really supporting somebody in nutritional repletion. So, part of part of this assessment phase is, not only HTMA and looking at, minerals, but also evaluating for things like iron deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, B12, homocysteine, folate levels. So even vitamin A. So kind of deep diving into what somebody's, nutritional status is, both through blood work and then, supporting that through repletion in their diet, and coupled with that, supporting blood sugar regulation, right? So these are kind of all pillars that not only can, kind of support reducing somebody's symptoms of anxiety, but can also have a big impact on just energy. Because, as we know, GI related dysfunction plus anxiety equals fatigue. So, supporting somebody and just, having better energy, reduce cortisol levels, better sleeping at night. It's like nutrition can really like kind of lay that, that foundational groundwork that enables somebody's body to, move into balance. Right.
I love that. Because I feel like so many like functional practitioners just kind of take the pill-centric thinking straight into their functional medicine practice and go straight to supplements.
Or like just start cutting, right? That's the other thing I see is like, a lot, and this is where I think so many patients, by the time at least they come to see me, they're like eating 10 foods or, and food just feels really scary. And, and so much of, I always like to, educate people, like so much of what they are experiencing is, not just like symptoms related to GI dysfunction, but it's actually symptoms of nutritional inadequacy and deficiency because, they've just been on such a restrictive diet for so long. And so, so like, you can't cut your way to health, and you can't like supplement your way to health either. Like you really do have to, think about supporting your body. Nourishing your body and, supporting all, like, I know, like nutrients and minerals are everything. Our body, every single system in our body is reliant upon them, right? Why do we forget that? But it's so often just like totally, I don't know, just like skipped over and jumped over on the way to, giving somebody a supplement protocol. But supplements are helpful too, and I think, especially like initially for, gut repair, of course, supplements, like there's, it's really hard to support gut repair through, through nutrition, and especially in a way that will give somebody like more immediate symptom relief. Right. So supplements are, are great when it comes to, to gut repair. And then, in my practice, I also use, supplements, particularly botanicals, things like adaptogens, things like, there's different combinations, but, depending on how somebody presents, there's different adaptogens that can be, better suited for one person over another, even things like lemon balm or like rhodiola, ashwagandha, maca, vitex, like there's a lot of different, botanicals that we can use that can, just help modulate that anxiety in the gut-brain axis. And then, of course, supplements to get people to that place of nutritional repletion faster too. That can definitely be really helpful. And then, of course, there's lots of supplements to address dysbiosis in the gut and gut motility, and all of the symptoms related to bloating, constipation, diarrhea. Supplements can be very, very supportive, but not in the absence of some of these other underlying foundational pieces.
Yeah, I love that. And I do the same. It's like, we're going to have diet be central to your plan. And then we're going to use testing to be intelligent about how that looks and what supplement protocols we move you through. And then another big area that I know we both work in is sort of like lifestyle interventions. And so, sounds like your person's going to have like a diet approach and a supplement approach. And then tell me about, for anxiety, some of maybe the more like lifestyle things that you might have them work on.
Yeah. So no pill without a skill, right?
Okay. Love that.
I know, no pill without a skill. So everything that we do has to come with a skill, whether it's, like the mindset piece, whether it's even just, slowing down and getting people to move into attunement with their body. Like one of the first usually assignments that I give someone is just doing a body scan every day, where it usually works best, like laying on the floor, being grounded, covered up in a cozy blanket, maybe, a mask, maybe meditation music, but really you're just, scanning your body. Again,
Yeah.
I think by the time so many people come to see us, they're in total disconnection from themselves. And
Yeah.
really what got you here won't get you there to healing. So, being able to having to tune into your body and understand that everything is a version and a form of communication. But when you're not listening, the communication is just going to get louder, 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 right? It goes from a whisper to talking to your body yelling at you. So just teaching people really how to slow down and listen to their body and move into attunement. So I like using things like a body scan. And I think too, especially for women, assigning just at least a moment in their day where they stop and they engage with their parasympathetic nervous system. It's that isn't in and of itself an end all be all, but it's absolutely a necessary starting point. So that can be things like the body scan. I also love just like legs up the wall, the yoga, that yoga position where you're just, again, laying on the floor, your legs are up the wall. It actually engages the parasympathetic nervous system, supports vagal nerve tone, just through poses that we can easily put our body into. But, so that I think like anything where we're just stopping, slowing down, moving into attunement is really supportive for the gut brain axis. So of course, things like meditation, things like yoga, all amazing. Other things that I think are absolutely essential though are time in nature. So, and doing things like ecotherapy where you're spending time outside. And there's really fascinating studies about how even looking at leaves, like the leaves, just
Yeah.
kind of like dancing in the breeze can actually increase things like serotonin in our brain, right?
Wow.
So, and even things like touching leaves, like when you go outside, like spending time in nature, either like putting your hands in the dirt, getting dirty, or like touching nature, actually, and then eating a sandwich while you're out in nature can actually start changing and inoculating your gut with beneficial bacteria, which also can then, change in, that whole gut brain connection, right?
Wow.
So spending time in nature, not only through how it changes our microbiome, how it changes neurotransmitter production, but it also helps to support circadian rhythm, right? So having exposure, especially within the first 10 minutes of waking up, getting exposed to sunlight, and then, moving into like darkness as like our day is like winding down, all of that can support better sleep habits, which also help to, support our microbiome and support the gut brain axis and reduce anxiety. And then I think there's lots of things, obviously, but the last thing I'll say is also movement, exercise. Again, the impact that it has on neurotransmitter production is, really, really beneficial. And the thing sometimes that I think we always have to keep in mind with exercise is that it has to be the right type of exercise at the right intensity for the right length of time, because pushing too hard and overtraining will only continue to perpetuate anxiety, and it will perpetuate the gut brain dysfunction and promote inflammation and increase that nutrient draw and need in the body. And I see that, unfortunately, like so often with women, because we think we've kind of been indoctrinated that we have to like work out really, really hard or really, really long. And the truth is like it's often not necessary. It's not even necessary for things like general health.
No. Yeah, it's such a disservice. It's shockingly uncommon, in my opinion, how often I'll see women come to me with an appropriate exercise routine. And it can be either side of that coin, where it's way too much, or too intense, or both,
or just
or
nothing at all.
barely anything.
Yeah.
It's like nobody's hitting it.
Right. And I think, again, like it's all representative of disconnection, though.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you really stop and pay attention, you really stop and connect to yourself, you start to recognize that living a sedentary lifestyle, sitting all day, it just feels really bad. And then if you're over exercising and you're overtraining and you're pushing too hard and your body's in a state of like, nutritional depletion and it's only contributing to allostatic load, I think sometimes like women totally disconnect from that as
Yeah.
well. So again, like this process of attunement, I think is so important because that our body has so much wisdom and it really is the guide. We just have
Yeah,
to pay attention.
absolutely. There's so much that we could dive into on that, but it's so good. Yeah. I
So
think
much.
even yeah, even across like your menstrual cycle, like what phase you're
Yep.
in, it depends. Like
Yep.
it's like different in terms of what
Yeah.
physical activity like should look like. So
Yep.
yeah, that
Absolutely.
that disconnection is real.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. For sure.
Wow. So there's it sounds like there's a lot that can be done for anxiety. So that's great news.
Yes.
And I'm sure that there's some people that would love to hear more about how they can maybe talk with you about your process and learn more about it, maybe get a little
Yeah.
support. So maybe tell people where they can connect with you.
Sure. So my website is www.gutbrainrd.com and same handle for Instagram. So just gutbrainrd. And if you go to my website, I am in the process of starting a YouTube channel where you'll
Ooh.
find a lot of like where I'm going to be continuously downloading a lot of content, including presentations. I do a lot of presentations, for various wellness companies and, just people who invite me. So a lot of that is going to be available on my YouTube channel. So
Awesome,
that's where you can find
Kari.
me. Yes.
Punch that like button and subscribe. It sounds like it's going to be awesome.
Yes, it's going to be awesome. And lots and lots of information. It gets a little bit nerdy at times, but it's also very fun.
That's how we like it around here. That's how
That's
you get
right.
somewhere.
That's right.
Kari, it's been a
So
pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the Empowered Nutrition podcast today.
thanks for having me, Erin.
You as well. Have a good rest of your day.
You too.
Take
Bye.
care.